All right, and now I'd like to turn over to our speaker for today, Pastor Alison. Let's hear it for her. Woo!
Good morning, everyone. As Anton mentioned, my name is Alison. I'm the lead pastor here at The River. It's so good to be here with you. Those of you who are here physically in the room today, welcome. And also a big welcome to those of you who are tuning in via live stream. So today, I'm excited to be kicking off a new series called Practicing the Way of Love. So I don't know about you, but when I hear the phrase, the way, I can't help but think about The Mandalorian. Are any of you Star Wars fans here? Have any of you seen The Mandalorian? Okay, some of you. I would describe myself as a casual Star Wars fan. So what I mean by that is that I've watched most of the movies and the shows on Disney+, but I am by no means an expert. But I did really like The Mandalorian, and I'm looking forward to the new movie that's going to come out in a couple weeks. For those of you who are less familiar with Star Wars, The Mandalorian is the show that brought us the cuteness that is Grogu, or as you may know him, Baby Yoda. And this is a show that picks up 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. It's a story about a bounty hunter named Din Djarin who, while traveling through the galaxy, ends up encountering and protecting a child named Grogu. Din Djarin is a Mandalorian, meaning that he comes from the planet Mandalore. He also happens to be a member of a religious sect called the Children of the Watch, who follow what they call the ancient way of the Mandalore. Now, the show doesn't tell us a ton about this religion, but some of their traditions include never removing their helmets in front of others. So if they want to eat, they have to kind of go off somewhere privately to take the helmet off. Another is taking care of foundlings. That's like a key value for them. So foundlings are children who they find and adopt and bring into the community. And then they also have some sacred waters that they bathe in for ritual purposes. And a refrain that we hear Din Djarin say throughout the series is, "This is the way." It's used in a variety of contexts. It's said as a greeting, as a mantra, as a point of connection, as a sign of belonging, and also as an affirmation that one is making the right choice or is on the right path. This is the way. And many of the people that Din Djarin encounters, they think that his religious practices are quite strange. From the outside, they seem weird and overly burdensome. But for Din Djarin, they are incredibly meaningful and sacred. Over the course of the show, as he learns more about his planet's history and as he encounters new people, we see Din Djarin begin to wrestle with the meaning of and the usefulness of his religious practices. He does not abandon them altogether, but he does begin to think about them in new ways. And this is a bit of what I hope that we all can get up to during this sermon series. My hope is that we can take these next 2 months to consider what it looks like for each of us as individuals and as a community to practice the way of Jesus, to practice the way of unconditional love. One of our core commitments here at the River is to help people more deeply embody unconditional love, or agape, as we often refer to it. The New Testament makes a big deal out of agape, arguing both that God is agape itself, and also that agape is central to following the way of Jesus. You may have heard that phrase before, the way of Jesus. This idea connects to something that Jesus said about himself in John 14. Jesus told his friends, "I am the way and the truth and the life." And then later in the book of Acts, we see that those who followed Jesus were said to be people of the way, or that they were practicing the way. We actually see that term pop up many more times than the word Christian to describe them. Historian Diana Butler Bass wrote this about the way of Jesus in her book, A People's History of Christianity. For all the differences between our world and theirs, for all the complexity of primitive Christianity, a startling idea runs through early records of faith. Christianity seems to have succeeded because it transformed the lives of people in a chaotic world. Throughout the first 5 centuries, people understood Christianity primarily as a way of life in the present, not as a doctrinal system, esoteric belief, or promise of eternal salvation. By followers enacting Jesus' teaching, Christianity changed and improved the lives of its adherents and served as a practical spiritual pathway. This way, and the earliest Christians were called the people of the way, bettered existence for countless ancient believers. The way, with its transformative power, challenged the status quo and infuriated ancient defenders of Roman religions, many of whom argued that the new Christian religion was an immoral sect with secretive rites and rituals that undermined traditional Roman values of loyalty and family. Indeed, early commentators scarcely attacked Christian doctrines, but they consistently portrayed Christian devotional practices as radical and socially divisive. So more than being known for their beliefs, early Christians were known for their practices. Practices that transformed their inner lives and that also shaped how they showed up in the world. And what were these radical and socially divisive devotional practices? 2nd century Christian defender Justin Martyr described them like this: "We who formerly valued above all things the acquisition of wealth and possession now bring what we have into a common stock and communicate to everyone in need. We who hated and destroyed one another, and on account of their different manners would not live with men of a different tribe, now, since the coming of Christ, live familiarly with them and pray for our enemies." Another description of early Christians, also from the 2nd century, comes from the Greek philosopher Aristides, who wrote this: "They love one another. They never fail to help widows. They save orphans from those who would hurt them. If they have something, they give freely to the one who has nothing. If they see an immigrant, they take him into their homes and rejoice over him as a brother." Early Christians, the people of the way, were known for their radically inclusive practices. They were known for loving one another and living life together, for sharing possessions in common, for ensuring that everyone had what they needed, for bridging barriers of hatred and division and inequality, for supporting widows, orphans, immigrants, and the poor. Now, it's important to note that the early church did not embody these values perfectly. If you read the book of Acts and the epistles, the letters to the different various church communities included in the New Testament, you'll see the squabbles and the shortcomings of early Christians quite clearly. And of course, as is fitting, these ancient people were still very much influenced by the cultures and customs of the world that they lived in. They, like us, were imperfect people doing the best they could in a specific time and context. So let's not idealize or romanticize the early church too much. But at the same time, it's notable that early Christians acted in ways that were different enough from those around them that people took notice. Unfortunately, today, in the United States and in many parts of the world, these radically inclusive practices that I described earlier are not what Christians are known for. Seeing the harm that people are doing right now and have done throughout history in the name of God is truly sickening to me. I feel so much anger and grief when I think about how far the church as a whole has strayed from Jesus' teachings. And yet, as real and as valid as those feelings are, I still find myself with reasons to hope. I'm hopeful because I can see for myself some of the beautiful ways that God's Spirit is still at work in the world, and because I have faith that God is doing so much more than I can see. And also, I'm hopeful because I know that the River and other churches like ours are part of a larger movement of people who are seeking to embody a more just and inclusive expression of faith. Just last week, Maddie, Scott, and I were at the Post-Evangelical Collective's National Conference in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was so encouraging to be together with hundreds of church leaders, artists, and other stakeholders who want to be a part of reimagining what the church can be in our current moment. People who are, to paraphrase Richard Rohr, seeking to criticize the bad by doing their best to practice the better. This was my third year attending the PEC's national gathering, and it always gives me so much to think about. There are many, many reasons for this that I could talk to you about, but one of them is the diversity of perspectives and approaches to spiritual practice assembled in the same room together. Individuals and churches like ours who consider themselves part of the post-evangelical collective all agree to uphold 5 shared values. They are the way of Jesus, full inclusion, holistic justice, deep and wide formation, and gracious posture. These 5 values are shared among all of us, but the ways that we express them in our own context vary significantly. And at least for me, this reality is simultaneously freeing and challenging. On the one hand, this kind of diversity opens up so many possibilities around how to live our faith in ways that feel authentic and life-giving for each one of us, as well as countless opportunities to learn from one another. At the same time, it points to the truth that there is, in practice, more than one right way to follow Jesus and to do church. That what is right for me and for my communities may not be right for other people and other communities. And this is why it's so important for us as people of faith to consider context, to exercise wisdom, and to practice discernment, both individually and communally. Because of the diversity that I know is present here in our own community at the River, I considered calling this sermon series Practicing the Ways of Love, changing the word way to the plural ways with an S, to try to convey the truth that there are so many different and equally beautiful ways of embodying unconditional love, of drawing closer to God, of growing spiritually, of deepening connections, of embracing abundant life, of pursuing justice, and so on. In the end, I decided that without context, it might be a little bit confusing, but I want you to know that this is the spirit behind the sermon series. Over the coming weeks, some of the practices that we'll explore together may be familiar. Others may be new to you. Some will resonate, and others will resonate with the person who's sitting next to you. I'd encourage you to try to keep an open mind and an open heart, but know that like with anything else at the river, ultimately you get to decide what to try or not to try, what to hold on to, and what to choose to let go of. Most of my sermon today has been framing for how to think about this sermon series as a whole, but I do want to talk about one practice today, the practice of communion. So depending on what branch of Christianity you come from or are familiar with, other names for this practice include the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper. This practice is tied to a significant moment in Jesus' story, the final night he spent with his friends before he died and was resurrected. During this final meal together, the Last Supper, as it's often called, Jesus and his friends celebrated the Passover meal together. And at one point, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And he did the same with the cup after supper, saying, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." So many of you know that I didn't grow up in the church. So I first started practicing communion as a college student. And if I'm being honest with you, when I began practicing communion, I thought the whole body and blood thing was pretty strange and morbid. I was a bit like the people who looked at Din Djarin, the Mandalorian's practices, and concluded that they were pretty weird. But this was my faith now too, and so I wanted to participate in communion, and I wanted to figure out what it meant to me personally. Over time, as I learned and practiced, I decided that for me, it felt more helpful to think about communion as a symbolic act, to view the bread and the wine as symbols of Jesus' presence rather than as the actual body and blood of Christ. Now, I completely respect folks who hold a more literal view of this practice. I just found that it didn't resonate with me personally. To this day, something about the act of taking communion still feels a little bit uncomfortable for me, but in a good way, not in a harmful one. I find eating the elements as part of a church service surrounded by community to both feel very vulnerable and also very sacred. During our Palm Sunday service, we read the Book of Belongings version of the Last Supper story, which they've titled A Feast with Friends. And I just love the way that their version frames communion as a type of remembering ceremony. So the story says, sometimes things happen that are so important and mysterious that we simply can't fit them into our human heads and hearts. They weigh us down like big, heavy stones as we puzzle and wrestle. It helps to do something with our hands and our time to give those big feelings a place to rest. We call that a ceremony. Jesus was giving his friends the gift of a remembering ceremony before they even knew they would need it. Something was about to happen that would change the world forever. It would confuse and inspire humans for the rest of history. Jesus didn't give his friends an explanation or a lesson. He just gave them a ceremony, a place to put their sadness, confusion, doubt, awe, and gratitude. The events or truths or questions that communion invites us to remember and to consider are important and mysterious. What does it mean that God became human and lived among us? What does it mean that Jesus lived and died and was resurrected for the sake of love. What does it mean that the Spirit continues to invite us to embody the way of unconditional love in our own lives? It helps to have a ceremony that allows us to pause and sit with these questions for a moment or two. To have a place to put our feelings about them, whatever they may be. To have an entry point that invites us to consider the wisdom of our bodies in addition to that of our minds. In the early church, this remembering ceremony looked a bit different from how we practice it here today at the river. For them, communion was practiced by eating a shared meal together. In her book, Searching for Sunday, Rachel Held Evans wrote this: "The first thing the world knew about Christians was that they ate together. At the beginning of each week, they gathered, rich and poor, slaves and free, Jews and Gentile, women and men, to celebrate the day the whole world changed, to toast to resurrection. While each community worshiped a bit differently, it appears most practiced communion by enjoying a full meal together, with special prayers of thanksgiving, or Eucharisteo, for the bread and wine. They remembered Jesus with food, stories, laughter, tears, debate, discussion, and cleanup. They thanked God not only for the bread that came from the earth, but also for the bread that came from heaven to nourish the whole world." According to church historians, the focus of these early communion services was not on Jesus' death, but rather on Jesus' friendship, his presence made palpable among his followers by the tastes, sounds, and smells he loved. I love that phrase. Jesus' presence made palpable among his followers by the tastes, sounds, and smells he loved. These days, communion does not always or even often look like a shared meal around a table. Instead, communion is practiced in a myriad of ways. In Searching for Sunday, Rachel Held Evans wrote this about communion's diverse expressions. "For some, it marks the climax of every weekly gathering. For others, it is observed just a few times a year. The bread might come as a hot loaf straight out of the oven, an oyster cracker nestled in the palm, or a thin wafer consecrated by a priest and placed directly on the tongue. The wine may be served from an ornamental chalice, a bottle passed around the table, or in rings of little plastic cups. The wine may, in fact, be grape juice. The atmosphere might be celebratory or somber, the room filled with organ music or guitar strums, Gregorian chants or clinking silverware. In more liturgical traditions, the prayers are as familiar as the taste of the bread. Let us lift up our hearts. We lift them up to the Lord. While in a Baptist church or a Bible church, the pastor may simply ask a member of the congregation to say grace. The elements and the meal are identified in different ways: the body of Christ broken, the blood of Christ shed, the bread of heaven, the cup of salvation, the mystery of faith, the supper of the Lamb. But in every tradition I know, someone at some point says, remember. Remember how God became one of us? Remember how God ate with us and drank with us, laughed with us and cried with us? Remember how God suffered for us and died for us and gave his life for the life of the world? Remember? Remember? Whenever I introduce communion here at the river, I always say the same words, and I'll say them again to you right now. At its heart, communion is an act of remembrance and an act of saying yes. Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me." He said, "Eat from the bread and drink from the cup to help yourselves and each other, to remember the ways that my love has been and continues to be poured out for you. Do it to remember who you are, a beloved child of God. Do it to remember that you and everyone else belong at God's table. Do it to say yes to the way of unconditional love." These words that I share whenever I introduce communion are shaped by how I have come to understand the practice for myself. Through study, through experience, through the communities that I have been part of over the years. For me, participating in communion is a way of intentionally saying yes to God. It's a way for me to say to God things like, "Yes, I want to feel your presence that is with me always and that is with me now in this very moment. Yes, I want to actively drink from your cup of love, to receive your love as a gift and to feel it flowing through my body. Yes, I want you to nourish me with the bread of life, to allow myself in this moment to loosen my grip on my desire to be self-sufficient and in control of everything. Yes, I want to remember the true things that you say about me, that I am beloved, that I belong, that I am worthy, and that I matter. Yes, I want to come to your table where everyone is welcome and where everyone belongs. God, I pray that you'd keep expanding my capacity to love, to welcome, and to connect across differences. Yes, I want to have the eyes to see the ways that you are present in and with the broken and the suffering. Yes, I want to carry the spirit of communion with me as I leave this place, to allow it to transform my inner life and the way I show up in the world. God, help me to remember, to remember, to remember. That's a bit of my prayer when I take communion, but it might look different for you. And what I love as we close today, I'd like for you to think about that a bit. So the two questions I'd like you to consider are, what might communion help you to remember? And what might communion allow you to say yes to? So at this point, I'd like to invite the worship team back up to the stage. And as they make their way up, please take the next minute or so just to reflect silently on these questions, and then I'll bring us back together to transition into our time of response. So in just a few moments, we're going to move into a time of responding through musical worship. One option during that time is to go and receive prayer from a member of our prayer team in the back of the room. If you came today with something weighing on you, we have members of the church who are specially trained to listen to you and pray with you about whatever may be going on in your life. If this would be helpful to you, please feel free to make your way to the back of the room at any point during the next few worship songs. Another option will be to take part in communion. So during the first song, trays with the communion elements will be passed around each section of the sanctuary. If you're tuning in via live stream, feel free to use whatever you have on hand with you. Here at the River, communion is open to anyone who would like to participate. This is a reflection of our conviction that all are welcome at God's table without exception. So if you'd like to participate, feel free to take one of the communion cups when the trays come around. In each cup, the top layer has a wafer and the bottom layer contains juice. So God, I pray that you bless these communion elements, that as we eat the bread of life and drink from the cup of love, that we will experience your unconditional love more deeply. That we will know without a doubt that we are beloved and that we belong. And that we will be inspired to practice our faith in ways that are radically inclusive. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.